Hello, welcome to take 2 for a Frank Herbert book that isn't Dune. I'm not going to talk about Dune. In all the previous takes I started doing that. However, Dune must be mentioned because whenever you say Frank Herbert, people go the author of Dune. And I believe that Dune is still the best, may not be still the best-selling science fiction of all time, novel of all time, but for many years it was. The one I read, however, is The Heaven Makers. A while back, I was lucky enough to pick up 2 beautiful condition New English Library Frank Herbert books. The Santa Roga Barrier was the other one, and I've already read and reviewed that, and now I have just finished The Heaven Makers. So, New English Library book, great condition, beautiful artwork. The artwork is not signed, it's not credited, and ISFDB seems to be unwilling to commit to who did it. My personal feeling is that it was almost certainly Bruce Pennington. Correct me if you know I'm wrong. But Bruce Pennington did a lot of covers for New English Library at that stage. He did quite a few others for Frank Herbert. And in one of the other editions of The Heaven Makers, you get that intense blue sky, practically the same shade, and similar shading of the desert to this one. So I'm gonna say tentatively Bruce Pennington. Great cover. You've got that cliff of impending doom, a group of heavily hooded and masked characters standing there, and a skull at the bottom. All very atmospheric. So Frank Herbert was an excellent author, and I feel that, well, everyone, even people who aren't into science fiction, know his name. He is yet underrated in that everyone reads Dune, and then they go on to read the rest of the Dune. I think there's 7 books in total now, and they neglect the fact that this man was a spectacularly good writer. He wrote classic science fiction, fantasy, and he wrote psychological thrillers, and he wrote them all with a beauty in his narrative that I assume came from his time as a newspaper reporter, and he also had a degree in creative writing or literature or something like that from after the war. So his writing is beautiful. His concepts are always unusual. He makes characters that are fascinating and absorbing, even if you can't always quite sympathize with them. There's not always empathy between the reader and the character, but the character is always interesting, vivid, and appropriate for the story. There are so many things about Frank Herbert's writing that I adore, and his concepts, all the best of speculative SFF is about concept. What if? What can we do to play with this notion? And he does that wonderfully in all his books. But this one was one I hadn't read before, and I am very grateful to have got it, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It came out in 1968, and some of the internets claim that this is a fix-up of 2 short stories that came out. If so, it's one of the most seamless fix-ups I've ever seen. I can't even tell where the differentiation line would be. Herbert had about, I think, at least 30 standalone books, and this is one of them. It could so easily have become a series. He's clearly got world building happening behind there that is really interesting, but no, standalone as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this book begins with a person who is traveling from civilization to a world or spaceship. We're not clear at first. Now, his name is Kalexel, yes. I keep thinking Klaxon. It looks kind of like that. But Kalexel. And we very rapidly find out what the whole scenario is. I'm not going to spoiler it exactly. I'm certainly not going to spoiler the end, but you need to give a certain amount of background on what it is, and it's a fascinating book. So, Kalexel is on the way to this world, or is it something else? Now, it slowly straightens itself out that there is in fact a world, but where he's actually going is a spaceship. It's not a spaceship. It's not a space station. It's not a spaceship. They call it a ship, but I think they call it a film ship or something like that. Story ship, that's it. It's a story ship. And this story ship is sunk deep into the ocean of this world where Calexel's people are, but staying hidden from the natives. And we very early on, so it's no spoiler, learned that Calexel is one of a species called the Chem. The Chem are immortal. They have lived for untold eons. At one point, someone says to someone on the planet, this planet and 10 others like it could have been born and died in the time I've been alive. All of the Chem are immortal. They have rejuvenation. They have very strong breeding constraints, and they're all melded together in this mesh from an implanted device that gives them a sort of group identity that allows them to detect others of the Chem and to some extent feel the empathy, empathize with their feelings. Now, this story ship is sunk in the ocean on what Calexel and the Chem think of as Fraffin's world. Fraffin is an artist, filmmaker, whatever, of the Chem who makes these amazing stories. Now, with immortality that has lasted that long, the main danger is in fact boredom. Boredom is the anathema of this species. And when Fraffin started making these, they're not exactly films, let's call them films for now, about this planet and the species on it and what they do, it's completely alleviated the boredom of the Chem. Now, Calexel comes as a visitor to this story ship on this planet, but he isn't actually a visitor. He's actually sent by the policing authorities, as it were, to find out what is happening on the world. They are certain that some sort of illegality, something that's illegal to the Chem at least, is happening. They don't know what it is. They've sent previous investigators, I think there's 6 or 7 of them, who have all returned the verdict of nothing illegal happening on this planet, but then, in a noteworthy way, abandoned the governing bodies and the general society of the Chem and went off to start their own planets. Because what's happened on this planet is Fraffin. Sorry. Fraffin has clearly developed it from the get-go, from before there was actually a species that we would consider sentient, into this species where all the history and all the violence and all the wars and all the big bad stuff is being turned by him and his crew into these series of films. These films are something like what other science fiction books would call a sensorium. You watch it, but you also have a physical connection. You can smell, feel the breeze, and emotively connect with the people there. So he's given his device quite an interesting name as well, which I remember as I was reading it, and I have lost it in this book. I was thinking, I think that is relevant to the era in which it was written. Well, never mind. It's here somewhere, and I will forget about it and mention it in the comments, probably. So anyway, these sensory experiences of wars and various other exciting events have been created, as it were, by the Chem meddling with the species on the planet and getting them to behave in certain ways. And that becomes very clear. It's a level of manipulation that to us would seem most immoral, but the Chem's morality is apparently completely lacking. It certainly doesn't apply to any primitive or subjugated species such as humans, because fairly early on we realized that the planet that is in question, that's being used as a filmmaking opportunity by Fraffin and his team, is actually ours. Now, all of that setup was really exciting. I loved the way the aliens were described, their motivations and their society. It all feels very alien. And I know that seems a gimme, but a lot of people, and I think especially more recent books, create alien species that are virtually identical to humans. We only know that they're alien because the book tells us so. This species feels alien. It feels alien in its motivations, in its society, in its aims and goals. And I loved reading about it. Very, very well written. Now, after that, we swap back down to the Earth, where we have got an incident occurring. It's an incident of a murder. A man has been set up to murder his wife by the interference of the chem. And the reason this whole little play has been set up is in order for the chem in charge of the world, Fraffen, to befuddle Kalexel into and entrap him in such a way that he can't give an unfavourable report of the world. So what you've got here is science fiction and of the better and more thoughtful kind. You've got a certain amount of thriller because you've got several plots, including the psychological question of what sanity or insanity is. And you've got more than a touch of horror, I would say, especially early on when you realise that all the humans that you know in this story and that all the characters that you're bonding with and all the incidences that are occurring, they are all completely and utterly being manipulated from above. It is a creepy, creepy feeling, and for people who like a bit of horror with their science fiction, this is something you'll like. Now, I'm not going to tell you too much about what happens, so this is going to be a short review. If anyone else has actually read this book, I would love to discuss it with them. There are so many nuances. The incident that Fraffen has set up in order to entrap the investigator is a man called Murphy has murdered his wife. This is being investigated or has involvement from a court psychologist, Thurgood, surname naming people. And he's brought into it by Murphy himself, who tells him to take care of his daughter. Now, our psychologist, Andy Thurgood, Alex or Andy or Tony or one of those mainstream names. Thurgood is a court psychologist. He used to date Ruth, who is the daughter of the man Murphy, who's just murdered his wife, Ruth's mother. So he's bought into it. Another interesting thing about Thurgood is that not too long ago, he had an accident in a chemical plant which has temporarily affected his vision. He has to wear dark glasses pretty much all the time. Any sudden light affects him negatively. He needs to adjust them continuously in order to drive. And as a side effect of that, he sees these things that make him worry about his own sanity. He sees these small spaceships full of little faces training objects at him. He can see the chem. They're shielded, but he's impervious, immune, or seeing through them, at least because of this visual accident. So you've got all these different things playing at each other. And I think this is a fantastic book. I wanted to keep reading it. I didn't want to stop. A few times I had that creeping sensation up your spine that you get from a good psychological horror book. But I never really wanted to stop for any length of time. The ending is also not a big shoot 'em up. It's more of a psychological creeper. And it's strange and surprisingly satisfying, with a very, very interesting epilogue. Several times in the last third of this book, I was thinking, I can't see how he can possibly wrap this up in a satisfying manner. But yep, Frank Herbert, he came through. This was great. Are there cons to this book? Yes, there are. And they may affect some people. So the modern reader might find this writing style dry. It is a little bit. I guess, in a way. I really like his writing style. Apparently some of the people who influenced him included H.G. Wells, Robert Heinlein, Jack Vance, and Powell Anderson. I think you can see elements of several of those writing styles in there. The characters are excellent. I really appreciate what he did with all the characters. He created these alien characters whose notions of morality, right and wrong, and illegality are completely different from ours. And then he's created these human characters, and the way they bounce notions of right and wrong off the two sides of the story to collide in the center is very thoughtful and very insightful often. I don't know that someone who is entirely used to modern writing will find the characters empathetic, because none of them are perfect and they are all flawed. I personally like that. All these characters and all the events are morally obscure. Frank Herbert is questioning morality here. He isn't giving you a quick get out of jail free card. So if you need to have a character who is a good guy because he's wearing a white hat and he never does anything wrong, you're not going to find that here, and you're not going to find a clear description of what right and wrong is. It's going to lead you to making decisions for yourself. Some things are obviously wrong in that they cause distress. Yeah, there's a lot to think about in this one, pretty much like the Santaroga experiment. Santaroga Barrier. The Santaroga Barrier 2. Who should read it? I think any classic SFF reader and fan of this writing genre and this writing time is going to find a lot to enjoy here. I can't see anyone who likes that era and that style actively disliking it. The aliens are great. The moral quandaries are amazing. The story is perfectly paced. And if you are a classic SFF writer, Frank Herbert is almost certainly on your bucket list. And sure, read Dune, but instead of going on to all 7 Dunes, maybe read Dune, take a break, and read one of his other fantastic standalones, novellas. He had dozens of short stories. And I would thoroughly recommend this one if you're looking for one. Trigger warnings. I've been reminded that I forgot to trigger warning in the last review I did that there is intimacy between 2 different species. Apparently that is a trigger warning. So consider yourself warned. The intimacy, there's no graphic sex scenes, and the intimacy is implied, but it is not consensual. It is coercive, and it's a very, very much a part of the plot. There's a lot of coercion in this book, and it is part of the moral quandary that is set to the reader to deliberate over in context, and it is part of the morality and confusion that is inflicted upon this immortal race that have never questioned themselves before. So, I hope I've convinced you. If you like Frank Herbert's writing, move past Dune and the Heaven Makers. You could do far worse than read the Heaven Makers. If you've never read Frank Herbert, and for one reason or another, I can think of a few, you're reluctant to engage with Dune, engage with one of these other books, and I can thoroughly recommend the Heaven Makers. Yeah, overall, great book. Thank you for watching. Read good books. Hint, this is a good book. Read this good book. Have a great day.